Welcome back, anybody. Today is January 28th, 2024, and this is the first video I'm shooting for 2024. Actually, it's the second video. I did one yesterday, but I've decided that I'm not going to be using yesterday's, so I'll be using today's instead, so you can forget what I just said about yesterday. The prime reason I'm doing this video is because this is what I've seen people use to lubricate their top rail on their machine. I've seen spray bottles. I've seen just plain old oil cans, oil containers, paint rollers, paint brushes, and yes, even these. And I've seen this also being used just on the top. Hopefully this will make sawyers' lives a little bit easier when it comes time to lubricate their sawmill rails. Anyway, I saw a video yesterday about Wood-Mizer sawmills and about a secret, actually lack of secret, that the sawyer didn't know about. And I'm finding that these two secrets I'm going to tell you about later, very few people, if any, know about them, which I don't understand why. But the first thing we're going to do is I want to discuss with you how the LT 20 and up, 20, 28, 30, 35, 40, 50 and 70, their single rail cantilevered system works. More importantly, how the rail itself and the carriage kind of intermarry, or maybe I shouldn't say intermarry, interact with each other, and how that part works. Then we can move on to the secrets that will be revealed. So here we go. Okay, first things first, this is my LT40 wide, but what I'm going to show you has to do with any of the cantilevered versions that they make, from the LT20 on up to the LT70. They're all basically going to operate in the same basic way. We have a single beam rail down through here, and there is a top rail right here where you can see my hand, and there's a rail down here on the bottom, and the carriage for the mill rides on those two rails. So what we've got here, on top of the rail, we have a cam follower right here that rides on the top of the top rail. And then on the side here, underneath, I don't know if we can see it, you can barely see the cam follower on the bottom. That rides on the side of the top rail. Now underneath, where we're going to go in just a moment, you'll see basically the same thing, but in a different location. Now the bottom rail along here, we have a cam follower, only one. So there's basically each half of the carriage, there's two cam followers on the top, one cam follower on the bottom, and their job obviously is to follow along this rail here and to keep the saw head vertical, perpendicular, properly aligned, etc. Well, that takes care of the basics for how the rail system works. Now it's time to show you what happens when you don't properly maintain the rail system. We got a nice clean rag here. And we got a really nice brown color. I would say it's almost like rust brown. So what that means is whoever owned this mill, me, has not properly maintained it by applying a thin coat of, in this case I'll be using ATF, on the bottom. Because I didn't do that, I've got to go down through here with some nice fine sandpaper, get it all cleaned, then put in my thin film of oil, again as a protectant, not as a lubrication necessarily. Once I'm done with that, then we'll get into the actual secrets that I wanted to tell you all about. That will be so exciting for you. So let me get started on cleaning this thing up, and then we'll move on. All right, while I was down here getting ready to sand off the rust, I noticed that when Wood-Mizer painted this lower rail, they made a little bit of a mistake, and they've left paint right here, and you see the bare spot right above. That is where the bearing rides. So what I've got to do is I've got to sand off the paint and clean up the upper area, and the lower area will have to be cleaned off also. So I'm going to get started on that right now. I tried sandpaper and it didn't do a very good job, but maybe you can see a better view here of the bare steel on top, a little bit of paint underneath, and then the bare steel underneath. And now to go over it with some 150, if I can find it. There we go. So I'm going to continue on for the remaining 20 some odd feet, and we'll get back to you. Here I'm squirting a little bit of ATF onto a rag, which I'll then apply to the bottom rail. When I'm finished, then it'll be time to reveal the deep, dark secrets that I've been withholding from you. Okay, this is what secret number 1 looks like. You're going to find something very similar to this on every LT sawmill from the LT15 on up to the LT70. They're going to look a little differently, but they all basically do the same job. And what we're going to do is we're going to take off this thumb screw. Some of the mills don't have thumb screws like this, but they have instead a bolt. But regardless, there's some type of fastener that holds it in place. Now when we take this thing off, and as you can see, it does not take very much to do that. Here we go. And we flip it over. What we've got underneath here is, again, felt. And the felt needs to be lubricated. This solves all kinds of problems. I've been doing this since I got the mill, and I've had no problem at all. If you take a look at my top rail, which I'll show you in a moment, you'll find that it's perfectly clean and clear. There's not one bit of rust on it, except any locations that this never actually gets to. Now, again, I prefer to use a pump oiler, but here you can use a spray. You can take a quart container and you can dump it on here. You can do whatever you like to get the oil on there. And so what I'm going to do is let that sit there and soak in there, and time is going to go by so quickly, it's going to be a blink of an eye. You'll never know it. So abracadabra. You see what I mean? One thing I also want to show on this right here for this particular mill, and I don't know if this is on all of them. I don't think it is. Right here and right here, I've got 2 holes that if I need to, I can put my handy dandy pump oiler right in there, give it a little bit of a squirt. Generally, I don't do that, even though it's an easy way of doing it, because I prefer to get the entire length of the felt oiled. So we're going to put this thing back in place and put our thumb screws back in. Got to find out where everything belongs. And that does it for the top oiler. All right, secret 2 is this device right here. It's not very clear, but that's about as good as I can get it. It's basically a cylinder with a hole in it, and coming out of the end, you can barely see, is a little bit of felt that's rubbing up against the cam follower. 2 parts of the secret 2A and 2B. Very few people seem to know about this being here. And number 2, very few people know that it needs to be lubricated. Now, the only way I know of lubricating it myself, and there's probably many different ways, but the only way I know is to use a pump type oiler like this. This happens to be a Goldenrod brand, but that's not what I'm pushing. And the whole idea is we put the pump nozzle right in there and we squeeze it. Now, you can't tell, but I can feel that the oil is going into the felt right now. And I'm putting really quite a bit of oil into it, but it seems to be absorbing all of it. There we go, we're done. So that's secret number 2. The oil that's now in this little reservoir with the felt will then be transferred onto the cam follower and keep that lubricated and also hopefully corrosion free as it travels up and down the lower rail. Now I remember what I was going to say. My recommendation personally, which may or may not agree with Wood-Mizer, is every week or so put in 2 or 3 good pumps of ATF into this to keep it well lubricated, and you won't have too many troubles on the lower rail getting corroded. Another very, very important part of the rail system is this ground shoe right here, which travels along the bottom rail, and this wire over here is what connects the battery negative terminal to the shoe, which then transfers that to the steel rail, which then transfers the ground to the hydraulic control unit at the head end of the mill. This is quite often overlooked by people, and they don't realize how important it is to have a good electrical connection between the shoe and the rail, and that's why the rail needs to be kept as corrosion-free as possible. If the shoe isn't making good contact to the rail, the electrical current may find a different route to get over to the hydraulic pump, and that route could be through the rail bearings on the mill. With the amount of current required by the motor, that could destroy the bearings. After seeing the condition of the bottom rail and how badly corroded it was, I've decided that from now on, approximately once every week, I'm going to rub it down with a nice, very thin coating of ATF. Hopefully that'll keep the corrosion at bay.